to the Real Forno Show on this glorious Monday evening. I am your host, Tyler Forness. We are 17 days away from round one of the NFL draft, so I thought I would bring the draft legend Thor Nystrom from NBC Sports Edge to talk about the most important positions on the field, and that is the skill positions. We're going to talk about why Malik Willis is a top 5 prospect in this draft, dive into the running back class, which is very different from past years, another deep wide receiver group, and while it's not top heavy, this tight end group is stacked. So make sure you stay tuned with us on the Real Forno Show.
Welcome to the Real Forno Show. Tyler Forness, contributor at NBC Sports Edge and USA Today's Vikings Wire, along with being a member at Climbing the Pocket.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Real Forno Show on this Monday evening. I am your host, Tyler Forness. We've got producer Dave in the truck, and with me is the legend of NCAA 14 himself with all the beautiful mini helmets in the background. His name is Thor Nystrom of NBC Sports Edge. Thor, welcome to the Church of Malik Willis. How are you?
Good to be here, brother. I'm ready to worship.
Oh, absolutely. Then you know what? Let's start off with the man himself, Malik Willis, because you and I are really steering the ship of the Malik Willis hype train, and it's really interesting to see how many dissenters there are. Because when we watched him in Mobile, the first thing we noticed is that arm absolutely popped, and then when you watch him on film, he's just playing hero ball 24/7 because he doesn't have an offense capable of helping him in any way, nor does he have talent around him. When you watch Willis, your biggest takeaways are he is the best player in this class, and I know you have said that before on our friends Purple Daily, their show. So talk us through Malik Willis a little bit. Why do you love him so much?
What's not to love? I call him the right-handed Michael Vick because there's no other player in NFL history that you can compare those tools to. There's only one guy with the arm and the athleticism, and that's Vic. I mean, the arm strength is analogous. The athleticism is analogous. And Malik Willis is a little bit more fortified and runs with a little bit more power. Now, jury's out, of course, if he reaches that ceiling. But just by definition, you have a transcendent talent in a class where there's really no other quarterbacks that even come close to qualifying for that. For me, you got to roll the dice right away. I mean, if I had a quarterback need and I was sitting at number one, I would be picking Malik Willis number one. And for sure, if I was the Detroit Lions, I'd be taking Malik Willis, if and when he's there.
Absolutely. And I did just that on NBC Sports Edge. Is a good football show here this afternoon, so make sure you go check that out. We did a full mock draft, and Malik Willis to 2 makes so much sense. Now, the rest of this quarterback class, Thor, is interesting, and we disagree as far as how we stack our top 5. I have Carson Strong at number 2. You believe I believe have him at number 4. Is that correct?
5.
Or is it 5? 5.
I got him at 5, but
through,
yeah.
Yeah, walk me through Carson Strong.
I was just going to say he's close to Pickett. Carson Strong?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Carson Strong, I mean, you love the arm, right? Like, I mean, the guy's got a bazooka, top 3 arm strength in the class. You put it next to Willis and Corral. It's that sort of grouping. We talked about this, Tyler, down in Mobile and plenty of time since, but Carson Strong, he has this sort of wonky evaluation where people are giving him this scarlet letter of having this degenerative knee when I haven't, like, I've heard from multiple medical teams have cleared that knee. I haven't heard one definitively come out to say that they haven't. And so for me, it seems like this is a guy who was playing through that injury last year. He was wearing the knee sleeve all year. His mobility was compromised. His ability to plant and throw off, off that leg, get the full arm strength, that was compromised. His ability to play under pressure was compromised for a combination of the two things. And then not wanting to drive into, step into, the human wreckage in front of him, to potentially knock himself out of the game with that knee. So I actually think that maybe it shouldn't be a scarlet letter on his evaluation. He should actually be getting extra credit for throwing for 4,000 plus yards, last year when he didn't have a throwing base and he had no legs under him. it's a slight concern. You have to bake it in a little bit. But I mean, I still like him. For me, he's really close to Kenny Pickett. And by the time the draft comes, I may switch that because Kenny Pickett, his ceiling is just so limited. Whereas Carson Strong, if he hits his ceiling, he's going to be a top half of the NFL quarterback, starter just because of the arm. So I like the kid. He's got a great arm, got a big league arm for sure.
Absolutely. And let's transition to Pickett because I don't think he's worth a selection before like the third round, just because, as you mentioned it, that ceiling is barely above his floor. And I just don't see him ever becoming that top line starter that you would need to invest that kind of high pick in when you have the Josh Allens and the Lamar Jacksons and the potential Malik Willises of the world who are really winning with just dynamic talent and dynamic traits. Kenny Pickett doesn't possess one. How do you rationalize selecting Pickett relatively early when he is more of a jack of all trades and a master of none?
You can't. I'm definitely not going to make that case for him. Everyone talks about the little hands that smell like cabbage, and that's funny for Twitter jokes, but that's actually not my concern with him. My concern with him is he was a 5-year player at Pitt, a 4+ year starter, 4 and a little change, and he didn't blow up until his last year. He didn't even really get above mediocre until his last year. And his last year, he had one of the nation's best receivers in Jordan Addison. He had one of the nation's best and deepest receiving cores. They went 5 deep legitimately at Pitt at receiver. They had 2 good tight ends. One of them's in this class, Lucas Krull, 2 receiving tight ends. And then they had 2 running backs as well. And then something that people don't talk, they talk all about the hands. I don't know why they don't talk about this. Kenny Pickett and Pitt, on the whole or whatever, but Kenny Pickett specifically with this evaluation got so lucky with his schedule last year. I went through and I added up all the ranks of the SP plus defenses that Kenny Pickett played, because of course he opted out of the bowl game. You average them out, it's number 80. Zach Wilson, one of the things in the last class that I was sort of dogging him for was being a 1-year wonder who didn't jump off until he had these ideal circumstances around him and they played a procession of crappy defenses. I don't think people realize how easy his schedule was, and I don't think they realize as well how good his supporting cast was. You mentioned he doesn't have the tools to take over games by himself. So the entire utility of Kenny Pickett is dependent on the circumstances around him. Right. Well, last year he had the perfect circumstances. So if you're going to draft him as though he's that guy, when he's throwing 57% of his passes or whatever within 9 yards of the line of scrimmage, many of them to the best receiver, not the best, but one of the best receivers in college football, and a crazy yak guy in Jordan Addison, there is a lot of inflated production there, both in terms of the completions and then also the yardage where it was just given to him. So, he has a short area accuracy. That's what you like. He's a good scrambler too. He's a little bit more athletic than people think, but you're talking low level starter, high level backup.
Now, speaking of high level backup, that's kind of how I project out Desmond Ridder, who's a little bit different than Pickett. Ridder has a little bit more of the athletic upside. He has a good arm, but his mechanics are all over the place, and the accuracy never truly improved over the course of 4 years. And I know you spoke a lot about Kellen Mond throughout the process last year, never really got better in his 4 years. And I kind of see the same thing here with Ridder. I think his ceiling is that of an Alex Smith, somebody who can run an offense with intelligence, not make a lot of mistakes, but doesn't really offer you that transcendent upside that you're looking for. Do you see Ridder in a similar light?
Yeah, well, I compliment or I call him mainland Marcus Mariota because I just see so many similarities between him and Mariota coming out. The one difference was the offenses they played in, right? Like they were polar opposite. Mariota played in Chip Kelly's like breakneck offense, and then Chip left, and then but Helfrich was still running the same thing, and Ridder, it was more of a I would say a risk averse type offense where he would toss it up to Pierce when he had the best of it. But other than that, the mandate was take care of the ball. Your point's well taken on the mechanical stuff. He's got more of a windup. It's a slower release. And the accuracy is not great. The one thing I will say is it did improve a bit last year. The year before in 2020, he had this is, in the preseason people were high on him. I ranked him as QB9 in my preseason rankings, and the reason was he had it was like 63% of his passes were closer than 10 yards from the line of scrimmage. And he also had accuracy issues even with that, even having this easy share of throws within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. And so it's troubling to me. It reminded me very much of the guy I ended up comping him to over the summer, Brett Hundley. It was the same thing at UCLA. They did a sideline to sideline passing game. And then, Brett Hundley would use his legs every now and again. And then you were hoping to catch the defense napping with a one-on-one deep shot. But this year, he dropped the within 10-yard throws. It was something like, went from like 63% to like 54. So it was like a legitimate, still high. 50, that's around where Pickett is. It's still in the very high end of the class, but it wasn't like ludicrous, like big red flag type ludicrous. He did that while improving his adjusted accuracy. Now it's certainly not even anywhere close to, top of the class, nothing like that. But for me, it was enough to rank him certainly above Kenny Pickett and get him up to quarterback 3 in this class.
And your quarterback 2 is somebody that I am also very high on, and that's Matt Corral. Corral is a really intriguing, what do you call it, evaluation, just because the offense he plays in is about 5% translatable to the National Football League and how the offense operates, especially from the quarterback position, with your reads, your progressions, and just the general concepts of the scheme. When you look at his talent and what he was asked to do at Ole Miss, how do you expect him to translate in a positive light coming to the National Football League?
I think it's going to take, I think he ought to sit at the beginning, just because you mentioned it. The progressions thing is your biggest concern. But I will say he got better with that this past season. In 2020, he was great. You remember, he was great. Like, Elijah Moore and Kenny Yeboah, like it was super duper explosive. But like the Arkansas game is where sort of the narrative changed there, where Barry Odom was just like, we're going to drop 8 guys and we're going to double team or triple team Elijah Moore every time. You're not throwing to Elijah Moore. And Matt Corral, he just glitched. You could see like smoke coming out of his ears. He didn't know what was going on or whatever. And he would just toss the ball up confused. He hit some linebackers in the chest plate, stuff like that. Compounding of mistakes. You saw sort of the same thing in the LSU game, although, that was so the Arkansas game, he threw 6 interceptions 2020, 5 in the LSU game. That game was played in a downpour though. So, a little bit of context, but I think it was 13 of his 14 interceptions, I think is the number, were in, or no, it was even more than that. Well, anyway, all but one of his interceptions came in 3 of 10 games last year in 2020. And what the improvement that we saw was this year when his receiving core was way, way down. And you could sort of see this in some of the alterations that were made to the offense. They stopped being quite as aggressive downfield. And Matt Corral didn't trust them as much. But as opposed to Sam Howell, who just wouldn't throw the ball at all, and he'd run all the time, you saw a more fluid sort of football intelligence and decision making out of Matt Corral, where he was still testing the defense when applicable, but if they were doing that crap to him, like dropping the 8 and trying to take away Drummond or stuff like that, he'd just be like, okay, whatever, I'm going to run this time. Would run, steal 5-6 yards as a scrambler, and that's something he's going to be able to do in the NFL as well. And dropping a bunch of guys into coverage against him is super attractive because he has a very, very strong arm. It was the first thing that popped off for me when he started playing, back like early when he signed with Matt Luke in Mississippi, because he comes out and he's like this little skinny kid. He's weighs like 185 pounds, but the ball just detonates out of his hands. His arm is not as strong as Malik Willis. But it's right up there with Carson Strong for number 2. Those 2 guys, and it might be Corral. So you have all the arm talent that you need. You also have a dual threat element to his game. He's also fearless. Apparently, he's turned into a really good leader there. He had problems earlier in his life, but he's turned it around, become a leader. He's certainly a gamer. That was a kid that he played through injuries all last year. Could have opted out of the bowl game. Arguably should have opted out of the bowl game. Didn't really mean anything to his evaluation, but he wanted to finish his career out with his teammates. Ends up suffering a high ankle sprain that has delayed the start of his pre-draft process. But just the idea that he played in the bowl game, I thought was really cool. He's got to learn to slide in the NFL, or he's going to get escorted off the field really quickly, at 190 pounds running around like that. But you learn to do that, and you learn to go through the progressions a little bit more fluidly, which we've already seen improvement in, and there's a lot of potential there. I rank him quarterback 2.
And he's going to end up my quarterback 3 behind Carson Strong. But you did mention Sam Howell. He runs a very similar offense with Phil Longo that Matt Corral runs with Jeff Levy. A lot of pre-snap reads, a lot of, hey, the decision's already made for you once the ball is snapped. How do you decipher out Sam Howell? Because I know you're just as low on him as I am. And the Baker Mayfield comps, to me, don't make sense because Baker Mayfield has a bazooka and Sam Howell has an al dente penny noodle.
He looked more like previously when he had all the NFL skill guys around him. And what really concerned me was when the skill guys around him, when that went away. You lost Dimey Brown, you lost Daz Newsome, you lost Michael Carter, you lost Javonte Williams. The way that his game just cratered, specifically as a passer, it was just night and day. The first 2 years really against the third year, and he went. I just complimented Corral for making better decisions, and then knowing when it was a disadvantageous time to put the ball in the air and then to steal the yards. The caveat there was at least Corral would still attack. He'd take the yardage if it was there, if that was the best option. But he was actively looking to pass. With Sam Howell last year, when his first option was gone, Joshua Downs is the guy that got all of his usage. And when Downs was not covered or was double covered or whatever, a lot of times Sam Howell was just tucking and running. It was sort of like Corral the year before, but the difference is Sam Howell. And this, by the way, is the big difference between him and Baker Mayfield. This is why I had to, take away the Baker Mayfield comp from him, because he's so risk averse. Matt Corral would never play like that, to that end of the polarity like Howell did. And certainly Baker Mayfield wouldn't have either. He has some tools. He came in, highly rated recruit. Him and Mac Brown turned around a program that had not been very good those first couple of years. But I think in hindsight, we were giving too much credit to Sam Howell for that and not enough credit to those NFL skill guys.
No, I completely agree. And as we kind of transition away from quarterbacks, we'll do a quick little blurb on running backs because let's be honest, the Vikings probably won't be taking one until day 3 at the latest if they do take one. But it is a sneaky need for the Vikings. You did have Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker as your top 2 running backs. When you look at them in comparison to previous year's classes, there usually is one guy that there's heavy talk of sneaking in around 1. This year, there isn't so much of that, although Breece Hall could be that guy potentially for the Buffalo Bills. How do you see the top of this class stacking up against classes of years past?
It's definitely down a little bit. I would say it's down a little bit. Maybe the second, third tier of running backs, that's what I'm interested in. So I would want to be taking my running back in this class like first half of day 3, like the round sort of 4 or 5 range. Because the guys that I like, it's like Zamir White, Rashad White, Abram Smith, Damian Pierce, James Cook, Pierre Strong. And then I'm very intrigued by Kevin Harris as a sleeper. So those sort of 7 guys, I'd be sort of sitting on them 4th, 5th round. And then if I could get Tyler Goodson in round 6 or round 7, I would do that in a second as well. So those are the guys that I like in this class. The top of it though, I ain't taking Breece Hall in round 1. I mean, Breece Hall's my number 1 running back, and I like his game quite a bit, but I'm not taking him in round 1. The picks are just too valuable there. And in this draft, there's other positions that are stacked. It's not the running back position. So I would not let a need dictate me to that. Second round, though, Breece Hall, I don't expect him to be, waiting around long to hear his name called on Friday. I think anytime in the second round. But with those first round picks, there's not a running back in this class that to me sort of transcends that and breaks the gate down.
And I absolutely agree. As we kind of hit this running back class quickly, who would be the three guys you think the Vikings should target in that day three range? Obviously, the one name that people are going to gravitate towards is James Cook, being that he's Dalvin's brother. The skill set is there, but who would be the three guys that you would want the Vikings to target?
Is Madison still there? Or is he gone?
He will be a free agent after this year, which is why it's a sneaky need. And the potential of
Okay.
moving on from Dalvin Cook, it gets a lot easier after this year. So it would leave Kenny Wongwu and AJ Rose as the only running backs on the roster.
How funny would it be if they took James Cook with the idea that they were going to be getting rid of Dalvin after this year?
That would be peak Vikings.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, with Dalvin, Dalvin can handle so much usage, and he's so multi-talented that you don't, with a lead back like that, you don't have to sort of pen yourself in to a specific kind of back. Um, for me, it would just be, who's, I guess like whoever I like the most that had fallen down there. Um, Kevin Harris would be interesting for me. He doesn't catch the ball too much, but he's one of the more underrated, I think, power back grinders, early down guys in the class. The reason being is because context killed him last year, and people aren't considering it in his evaluation. In 2020, as a sophomore, he was fabulously impressive. He had a really, really, really strong year behind not a very good offensive line, and there wasn't much talent around him, just period. But this past season, like he had a back injury that he suffered in practice in the summer, and then he wanted to, sort of like Carson Strong with the knee. He wanted to rush back and play. He didn't want to miss any of the season, but he would compromise through the first at least part of it, where he wasn't moving around as well. He wasn't as I guess devil may care into contact into the collisions, because this is a guy when he's right. It's the sort of battering ram thing where he's going to accelerate into contact, and that's his game. It's just dealing out punishment or whatever. So he would be an interesting guy to look at. Tyler Goodson, maybe. I mean, if Tyler Goodson is there, like I said, 6th, 7th round, Tyler Goodson does a whole lot of things. The thing that he doesn't really do, it's like running between the tackles, but the rest of this stuff, I mean, and he can do that. It's just not as effectively as some of these other guys. But the rest of his game, I'm taken with. Like he's a really good receiver, really skilled receiver. He's a better pass blocker than people give him credit for, because like he's smaller, but he sticks his nose in there and stuff. He's not dominant at that or anything, but he's certainly passable by an NFL level. And then you have the speed, you have the explosion. He's a guy, played in his own system at Iowa. And he's a guy that if you give him opportunities to bounce it outside, you give him the opportunity to pick down the line and then do his acceleration thing. When he gets into the open field, it's the sprinter stance, and he's trying to book it all the way, and he's got the juice to do it. Tested really well, so he'd be another guy that I would look at. Let's see, another day 3 guy, maybe Tyrion Davis-Price, maybe. I think he'll probably be there. That would be going the complete opposite way of Tyler Goodson. Tyrion, he's a power back, is what he's even a bigger one than Kevin Harris. Harris can do some more stuff outside the tackles and stuff like that. The LSU kid, Davis-Price, he better between the tackles. Davis-Price is also arguably the best pass blocking back in this class. So he would provide you utility with that stuff. I think those are 3 guys I would look at.
Absolutely. I know how much you love Spin Shady, and that would be really cool to see him come to Minnesota and be able to thrive in that wide zone system. Oh, it would make your Iowa heart very happy. But let's kind of move on to something that Iowa doesn't know a whole lot about, the wide receiver position. The Vikings have one in Amir Smith-Marset, but with the transition to a likely 11 personnel system, they don't really have the depth at this point to be able to maximize it. So wide receiver is going to be heavily on the table for the Vikings at some point in the draft. And it could end up being in round 1 with how talented this wide receiver group is. We were talking the other day about our top wide receivers, and I know your piece released over the weekend for NBC Sports Edge. Your number 1 wide receiver is Drake London, somebody we haven't talked a whole lot about on the show because your wide receiver 2 is my wide receiver 1 in Chris Olave, and that he's been getting a lot of the attention here. What about Drake London's game makes him different from somebody like a Devin Funchess, who is also a very big body receiver, who does well in contested catches, but they are far from similar players. What separates him from just being a contested catch guy?
Yeah, well, so first about the contested catches, I would say, his ball skills, it's just about the best you've seen in the last 5 classes. So it's you're not, you sort of put him above the typical guy that's led by, like a N'Keal Harry, right? Like Drake London's are better than that, mostly because he can get up with anybody. He's almost 6'4", but he's like just a shade under, but his wingspan is 6'6". And anything that so he has this like catch radius of an Indian god, and anything that comes in it, he's catching the ball. Like he's just got great hands. The other thing that people do not give him enough credit for is speed. He's very quick. They're with the timing or the what do you call it, the GPS or whatever. He's been clocked in the low 20 mph, stuff like that. He's got speed. The thing that we don't know as much about is the shake. Like he's an athletic kid, but like in the USC offense, there you were typically lined up in one spot, and you had sort of these pre-delineated routes. I would have liked to have seen him testing in the agility thing. But the one question that I do not have about him is speed. And then again, the ball skills are just insane, comparable to what we've seen in recent years. So that's why I like. And by the way, the ball skills and the downfield skills with him, it doesn't just manifest in the chunk yardage that he can give you, or the possibility for downfield pass interferences, which as Minnesota kids, we know all about the value of that with Randy Moss from back in the day when he would get up, once per game. It was like they were holding him downfield. We get a 50-yard penalty or whatever. You get that stuff. But the other thing about it with him, it's the same thing as it was with Randy, where if you have that kind of special utility down the field, it opens up spacing for the rest of your teammates. Chris Carter, he was Randy Moss at best. He loved Randy Moss, loved him, because once Randy Moss was there, you can't double team Chris Carter no more, right? Because you got to keep people back on the one side. If you don't give help back deep to Randy Moss, he's going to score a touchdown. So it's the same sort of thing with Drake London, where you're going to have help on that side deep. When he gets past the cornerback, you got to have someone back there or with the cornerback to contest, at the catch point or whatever, because otherwise he's going to go up above no cornerback can get up with him. Like he didn't jump, do the jumping or whatever, but he would have jumped at least in the mid 30 inches. And again, 6'6" wingspan. So he's going to get up above anyone. And if the ball touches his hands, it's coming in. Those are the things I like about Drake London.
Now, the biggest question I have is Drake London, how well does he fit with Minnesota in what Kevin O'Connell likes to do in that kind of McVay 11 personnel system, a lot of choice routes? Does he fit in really well with this receiver group? And of those top 5 receivers, who would you prefer at number 12 if the Vikings go that route?
I'm not really sure that he is. There are teams that I think London is a better fit for. I want him on a team that, with a guy who's aggressive throwing downfield and has the arm to get it there. I'm sort of afraid that he would be wasted with Kirk a little bit. Cousins' game, it's more like, for the guys that create separation. We've seen it with Diggs and Thielen and, Jefferson as well. But, he can throw it downfield. But like with London, there's, that Josh Allen's the guy that I want him to play with. We'll see. But like that, that's the sort of quarterback that I would want him with. As far as the Vikings, I think their type is more like Olave and Wilson. And maybe Jameson Williams, I'm not sure, but I think the 2 Ohio State kids are the Vikings type.
I 100% agree. And as we kind of continue to move the show along, day 2, guys, is probably going to be where the Vikings end up targeting a receiver if they do get one. You have Sky Moore, Calvin Austin, Christian Watson, George Pickens, Alec Pierce. There are some really good guys in that group. And then you can also talk about Jahan Dotson, who potentially could be falling to that 46 range. Who are some of your favorite day 2 guys? And I know Christian Watson's one of them because I know he beat out Treylon Burks for your wide receiver 5.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, if Christian Watson ends up getting into day 2, we'll see about that. He's definitely knocking on the door of round 1 right now. No chance he gets the Vikings pick. Sorry, Vikings. I do not see it happening anymore. But as far as day 2, and I'm going to talk about round 2 specifically, I think in this class, it's going to be really fertile hunting ground for receivers. And I mean, this is almost like a 12 over 5 in the NCAA tournament type thing at this point, where we've seen so many wide receiver hits in round two. It's not like a categoric thing. Like, I mean, last year, yeah, Tutu Atwell, it doesn't look like he's going to turn into a stud. And like, not every single one is a hit, but we've just had so many over the last decade that have turned into multi-time Pro Bowlers or whatever. And this class is as well, I think is going to have a really good second round for receivers. You mentioned Sky Moore. I mean, he would be the guy at the top of my list, assuming that Burks and Watson are not there. But if one of those two guys was, they'd be my top one. But then Sky Moore, Dotson, I like him too. In fact, there's 10 receivers in this class that I really, really like. For me, there's a little bit of a drop off after that. But any of those 10 guys, I'd take in a second in round two. So, Sky Moore, Jahan Dotson, George Pickens, Wan'Dale Robinson are the other ones. And then, even going beyond that, like Khalil Shakir is an awesome slot receiver. Alec Pierce, you talked about him before with Ritter. I sort of consider him like a Ferrari version of Eric Decker. Like Eric Decker with more athletic juice is basically what Alec Pierce is. Kelvin Austin, we talked about him, Tyler. He has the test, basically the exact same size adjusted athletic composite as Tyreek Hill does. So you have that package coming in, on the smaller side, but just crazy explosive and fast. Tyquan Thornton is a guy that I'm super interested in from Baylor. It was weird with Thornton before, Tyler, that I watched a lot of Baylor live because of my brother, being an alum. Tyquan Thornton did not stand out until this past season, and he came out of absolute nowhere. I mean, I shouldn't say nowhere. He was the wide receiver too, but we hadn't seen anything like we had seen this year, even though he had been on the field before. And so people might wonder why, with that. Well, it's sort of the opposite corollary of what happened to George Pickens when he came back this year, where in 2020, when George Pickens looked awesome, who was his quarterback? JT Daniels, a guy who his game is predicated on throwing the ball down the field. What's Pickens' special sauce best thing? It's going up and catching the ball in contested situation downfield. So those two, it was a perfect marriage. But then Pickens comes back this year off of his injury late in the season, and Stetson Bennett, the noodle arm scrambler, is now behind center. So it was not nearly as good of a fit. Stetson Bennett did not like to air it downfield, and he didn't have the arm to do it even when he did. We saw him get it down in the championship game, not way down, but he, got it as far as he could. But anyway, you see the difference there. And a very similar thing with Tyquan Thornton, where previously his first couple years on campus, he was playing with a noodle-armed pocket passer in that case, and Charlie Brewer. Last year, Baylor goes to Jerry Bohannon. Brewer had transferred out. Bohannon's a dual threat guy that can get the ball down the field. Bohannon has a lot of other warts outside of that, but he could do that. And Tyquan Thornton just took off because the offense was grind the ball with Abraham Smith behind, this zone blocking scheme or whatever. And Abraham Smith, a linebacker convert, took to it very quickly. And then when defenses would try to start inching up or whatever, because he ended up running for over 1,600 yards. That's when they would chuck it over the top, when get Thornton in one-on-one situations. Incredibly explosive. In the speed, speed speaks for itself. He was one of the jaw droppers from the NFL Combine, and he can legitimately make plays downfield. So if people want to know why he was a one-year wonder, he didn't come on late. It's because of context. And I think you saw last year when he at least has a quarterback that can get him the ball down the field. I think his NFL projection, it's as a wide receiver too, pop the top guy. Like, older folks can sort of think about Dallas's offense with Elvin Harper, when you had Elvin Harper across for Michael Irvin, so that you could open up, the defense had to keep people back. They couldn't stack the box against Emmitt Smith. You couldn't roll too much coverage at Michael Irvin. Jay Novacek had more space to work. That's what a player like that does for you. So I think Tyquan Thornton is an attractive receiver as well in this class. I have him 15. I'm ranking him pretty aggressively, but I've seen what he can do. And again, all he needs is a quarterback with arm strength, and I think he's gonna be an NFL caliber starter on one of the sides.
I agree completely. Last guy I want to talk about, just because he ended up going to my high school, another wart on the PJ Fleck recruiting trail, and that is Isaiah Weston, the pride of St. Michael Albertville High School. Also went to Northern Iowa and was a hyper-productive receiver for the Panthers, and ended up third all-time in the relative athletic score composite for athletic traits, one spot behind Christian Watson. What do you like about Isaiah Weston? How does he project, and where can he go in the draft?
Well, Tyler, I told you what I put in my Weston scouting report, that he was the second most athletic specimen to come out of St. Michael since Tyler Forness. So, but as far as his game, I mean, what sort of playground ball for receiver, I guess is the way that I would put it. The way that they used him, he's an athletic freak for sure. And what they did, he was literally just the top guy. He just ran 9 routes all the time. It's like Isaiah, when we say hut, you're just going to run as far and as deep. It's like Forrest Gump, just run straight. And sometimes they throw him the ball, and oftentimes he was, a decoy or whatever. He's got to catch the ball better, but he can get downfield. He can get downfield, and he's going to get downfield in the NFL as well. It's all going to come down to his hands. It would be nice if we could teach him some more routes, but honestly, for him, the gatekeeper to him being a long-term viability in the NFL, it's the hands. Because if the hands come along and you have you're a one-trick pony, but you do have a trick, he'll hang in the NFL just with that. He wouldn't bounce up, and unless he got much better at the other routes, in addition to the hands getting better. But again, that's going to be the big thing for him. But the athleticism plays. He can get off the line. He's going to be able to get off the line in the NFL. He can be able to get downfield. We'll just see beyond that. Can the ball skills improve?
Absolutely. He looks like a really nice day 3 target for a team that really wants a height, weight, speed guy. Feels like a Green Bay Packers target, but we'll see. As we move on to this tight end class, this tight end class doesn't have a Kyle Pitts. It doesn't have an OJ Howard, a TJ Hawkinson, or a Noah Fant. It doesn't have a guy who's going to sneak into that first round. It has a lot of depth from about pick 50 to pick 150, where you could see upwards of 10, 12 guys come off the board. Who are the guys that know your tight end rankings haven't come out yet? That should be coming out here shortly, as we were talking about pre-show. Who do you really like from this tight end class? And what style of tight end do you think is deepest? Is it the move guy, the inline, H-back? Where do you think the real value is with this group?
It's probably the move ones, where there's more of them. But the inline guys, I give them sort of extra credit or bump them up if they can block it off, just because you have more utility in the NFL that way. The big slots, we've seen them over the years where I'm not sure that the big slot player has, unless it's the Kyle Pitts, that's different. But even like Evan Ingram was like a good example, or was like a good version of this, and he's just been sort of okay. So for me, if I can find an inline guy, or a guy that can handle, a decent amount of that work, that has a well-rounded skill set, those are the kind of guys that I'm looking for. Tyler, a guy that we saw down in Mobile that impressed us a lot, Jeremy Ruckert. I rank him tight end 3. So I got him up. And my tight end rankings, by the way, come out on NBC Sports Edge tomorrow. But I do have them finalized. Jake Ferguson, I would say, in comparison to most, I like him a lot. I have him at tight end 4. I actually have Jake Ferguson ahead of Greg Dulcich. Ferguson is athletic. He has the frame. He does inline. He's a legitimate inline projection and player, and he can receive too. He is, you talk about context hurting a player. He has been in a really bad spot the last couple of years, having to work with Graham Mertz. It was not his game. But you go back a couple of years ago, when it was like Cone at the end, Ferguson looked really good as a receiver. I like him as a blocker. I think he's got chops as a receiver. So one of those sort of dual threat inline guys. I like him. Some other guys further, Charlie Kolar, I got at 6. I think I like him more than others. He tested better than we thought he was gonna. And then I would say Jelani Woods, but I feel like people, at this point, like maybe I'm just average. Like I have him 8th. And I feel like at this point he's risen up enough. Daniel Bellinger, I would say too. Yes. Daniel Bellinger is a guy. Yeah, Daniel Bellinger is. We know that he's a stud. These are the kind of prospects that I like when that they have at least one skill that absolutely will translate. And with Bellinger, it's his run blocking. but there's hidden value with him because San Diego State's offense, they don't throw. They're basically the Wisconsin of the G5 in nice weather. Is how their offense runs or whatever. They don't do a ton of throwing to the tight ends. Well, Bellinger, and by the way, I knew that Bellinger was a good run block. Watching those MWC games late at night. Over the years, Tyler, we were doing quite a bit of that. In the fall or whatever. You knew that he could knock people's heads. Blocking for Greg Bell. Or, they've had a long line of good running backs there, but you didn't get to see him much, running downfield, testing the seam, doing different stuff like that. So I didn't know what his athletic profile was going to be at all. And then he came out and he tested like a banshee. So Daniel Bellinger is a guy that I would have my eye on. I have him ranked tight end 9. Like I have him above like Cole Turner and some guys like that, that are maybe a little bit more popular. I think Bellinger is a sleeper to keep an eye on.
And how much I really like Bellinger's performance from the Senior Bowl. Really showed an athletic element that we did not see from the Wisconsin of the G5, which I got to say is an all-time line. Never would have made that comparison, but it makes so much sense. And as we kind of transition forward to the mock draft, Dave sets that up. I got one more question about this tight end group. Like, who is going to be the best fit for the Vikings? Inline is going to probably be more their forte with how they want to transition into this offense. Smith Jr., great move tight end. He's a capable blocker, but you probably want him kicking out, and you don't want him really blocking inline nearly as much as Kyle Rudolph when they ended up drafting him, because it was kind of like a perfect yin-yang scenario. So who would be the guy that you would want the Vikings to take? I'm a big Rucker guy. Feels like Ferguson is just Jeremy Rucker 2.0, where they're very similar players and they kind of come from a similar mold, just not a lot of usage, great frames. Who would be your targets for the Vikings?
I would say, so we're talking like later on in day 3 or like day 3 targets, right?
Likely day 3, early as I'd say as early as 77, and it would probably be the start for where they'd consider tight end, and then moving forward from there.
Okay, I would say for me, the guys I would look at, Ferguson, like I mentioned, Bellinger, Cole Turner, I think could deserve a look. He certainly has the frame for it. He's got the receiving skill. We didn't see as much of it down in Mobile, but we certainly saw it on tape. And he tested better than he was moving around in Mobile. So I think people got, certainly I did, I know you did too, got a bad taste in their mouth from Turner at the Senior Bowl because he looked like he had cement in his shoes or something, but he has nice tape. He's the size of an inline guy. And by the way, he played in line there, like last year, 75% of his snaps came in line. So, you got, at least some of that, he ain't a good blocker, but like you can put him at in line or whatever. Another guy later on, two other guys I would say for like, if we're going like further on into day 3 that I would point them to. Austin Allen, number 1 from Nebraska. I definitely think he's got some sleeper chops. Tested in the 80th percentile size adjusted athleticism. And then out of this tight end class, stacking the rankings, he was number 3 in PFF grade, number 3 in PFF receiving grade, number 9 in PFF run block grade, number 13 in PFF hands grade. This is a guy that played 72.8% of his snaps in line. And again, tested in the 80th percentile. As Nebraska had this really wonky offense, and with Adrian Martinez, they haven't been able to pass really well the last couple of years. So a guy like Austin Allen did not get to see, did not have the correct platform to show, what those movement skills on a guy that size. He measured in at almost 6'8", over 6'7.5", and 252. So an athletic kid, very, very rangy. And he has shown on a per snap basis, not in terms of the counting numbers, but per snap basis, he's shown some skill as a receiver and also, of course, as a run blocker. The other guy I was going to mention is, I think he's the only guy in this tight end class who's taller than him, Curtis Hodges from Arizona State. He a guy plays in the inline as well that has above average NFL athleticism coming in. He tested 74th percentile. But he's another guy that acquitted himself well, both in terms of run blocking. And then he showed some stuff as a receiver too. The way that they used him, it was like, they would, they would run, of course, they had the three-headed monster at running back, and then Jaden Daniels or whatever. But with Hodges, they would send him down the field quite a bit. You try to catch the defense napping and get him over the top in the seams or whatever. He can make plays down there. His ADOT last year from this class was number 12. And he was also in the top 10 in yards after catch per reception amongst his tight end class. So Curtis Hodges is going to go pretty late, but he's a guy who got, an NFL combine invite, who has the requisite athleticism, who's one of the, biggest tight ends in this class. And he can do a couple different things. So I'd look at him too.
And, I lied. I have one more question because Drew, who hosts the Vikings Report on YouTube, who I'm going to be on their show next week, mentions Jalen Weidermeyer. Because Weidermeyer was projected to be top 1 or 2 tight end in this class going into the year, had kind of a down season. Obviously, Zach Calzada throwing to him is really going to hinder that, because even though we don't like Kellen Mond, Zach Calzada is still a pretty steep downgrade in the SEC from Mond himself. And then he tested absolutely abysmal, running a 5.03 second 40-yard dash, which we knew he wasn't going to be fast, but that's cause for concern. How do you contextualize the testing versus the tape in the case of Weidermeyer?
Yeah, it's tough. You in 2020, you saw it. There were some big games too where he made some real plays with Kellen Mond. Now, you rarely saw it down the field. That's how he tricked us. It was all stuff within 10 yards or so, but in the intermediate area, he did a good job shielding defenders, with his back, sort of rebounding, and then getting his hands out there, catching it, plucking it clean in the air and stuff like that. That stuff he's good at, and he can block too. So, any pure inline guy or whatever. In 2020, it was you go back to circumstance and context. It was context that behooved his game, and he acquitted himself well. But like you mentioned, this year, Mon, who was, we can rip on him as Vikings fans, but he was an above average starter in the SEC for sure. And then this year, is between Calzada and then the kid that got hurt at the beginning of the season. Calzada, they couldn't get him out of College Station fast enough after the season. So Weidermeyer, his receiving game, like you mentioned, it went way down this past season. And then, he of course went out and tested, and it was like this sort of, that was one of the most shocking, athletic profiles that was put out by any player. And again, I think the reason that he fooled nobody thought he was crazy athletic, but no one expected him to be that poor of an athlete, just because I think Jimbo sort of protected him really well by not sending him downfield, not sending him down the seam, stuff like that. My comp for him is another guy that sort of has a similar story. Jared Pinkney, you remember him? Where it was like, he had the one good year, maybe even 2 good years, and then the situation sort of changed around him and his game cratered, and then he went and tested and didn't tested poorly. I still think that Weidermeyer, like if you're in the later in the 6th round or in the 7th round and you need a tight end, I don't got no problem with that. I don't have any problem with that at all, because you've seen the hands and the blocking. He's going to be limited. He ain't never going to start in the NFL. But if you needed a guy and you needed a depth guy, and he sort of fit the specification of an inline guy that could at least be an outlet guy short, that would be fine, I guess. I rank him 14. So I don't know. That's right. Like I got him behind Austin Allen, for instance, behind James Mitchell. I got him behind that kid from Maryland. So he's just a guy for me.
Makes total sense. And as Dave pulls up the mock draft simulator, I want to remind everybody that this program is sponsored by Lake Monster Brewing, where the last time you saw Thor on this network, he was on Vikings Happy Hour Wednesday night with Matt and Ryan, having beers at the brewery itself. And don't forget, on Friday, April 29th, we will be live at Lake Monster Brewing for day 2 of the NFL draft, sipping on some delicious beer and giving you guys live coverage of the favorite spectacle of the year, that is the NFL draft. And Dave, let's pull up the simulator here. Thor.
Welcome to Climbing the Pocket's Mock Draft Mondays. Who will the Vikings pick, and who's your favorite choice?
Thor, I have a comment from my wife who says that you owe her $30 for this show.
It didn't involve any gas or any driving. I feel like now she's just sort of laying me on the charges because I'll pay.
Oh, I can hear her from the hallway, and she's just laughing right now. So that's we got a good pop out of her, which is awesome. Anyways, let's pull up the simulator. Thor, I'm gonna kind of let you steer the ship here. I'll set the table.
Oh, yeah.
Just a quick 3-round mock draft, and take it any direction that you want, and then just kind of explain the reasoning. Eric Edholm was on the show last week, and he ended up taking Chris Olave with the first overall pick, which obviously I was a very big fan. Stingley ended up being on the board, but we kind of steered the ship away from that.
All
right, Dave, you have to read the trades off. I cannot see.
First one, we have Saints go down, drop to 16, take their fourth at 120 for our 12th. Other one is these guys got cojones. Houston wants to give us their second, third, sixth, and a third next year for our first. And we have the Patriots wanting us to drop down to 21 for a third and a sixth. Best value there would be the Saints if we pick it. 1 for 4. 1 and 4 plus for 1.
I'm looking up the Ridge Hill trade charts. So our pick at 12 is worth 347 points. The Saints pick at 16 is worth 305. So you got a discrepancy of 42, and then the 120th pick is 26. So we got to decline that.
Okay, declining them all. That was the best of the three.
Okay, perfect. All right, so here's what we got on the board, Thor, as Dave kind of scrolls out here so we can see the available players.
Come on.
Jermaine Johnson's off the board, so is Sauce Gardner. But we have your favorite player, Derek Stingley Jr., Drake London, Kenny Pickett, Jameson Williams, Jordan Davis, Trevor Penning, Andrew Booth Jr., Devontae Wyatt. So when you kind of take a look at the board, it is not very favorable for the Minnesota Vikings if you are not a Derek Stingley Jr. fan. What direction do you believe that they should go here?
This would be one of the worst case scenarios as far as guys falling down. I'm not a Stingley guy. I'm not sure if the receivers have utility for this. Do you like you and Edholm? Do you guys actually think they would take a receiver at 12?
I think it is potential. I think it's probably 10%. But as I kind of mentioned pre-show, the whole point of Derek Stingley Jr. to the Minnesota Vikings is really predicated on the information that the new cornerbacks coach and Justin Jefferson and Patrick Peterson are able to give Kwesi Adofo-Mensah because they have Derek Stingley Jr.'s position coach here. And obviously Jefferson played against him in practice. So there is continuity there. If they say no to Derek Stingley Jr., that's a big red flag for us as far as where he could go later on in the draft. I think receivers potential. As far as the board fell, the top 4 edges are off the board. You have Sauce Gardner off the board. You could talk about McDuffie. You could talk about Andrew Booth Jr., Kyer Elam potentially. But is there true value at taking them at 12? I don't know. I've got a piece coming out for NBC Sports Edge tomorrow talking about day 2 wide receivers. But the way this class is sitting with these top 5 guys, I think that they will be willing to take a guy and maximize positional value rather than take somebody like a Jordan Davis.
Yeah, for me here, I would go with Trent McDuffie. The guy that I call McDuffie Island. I know that some people got issues with him because of his arm length or whatever. Anything that doesn't require a ruler to measure, he has over Derek Stingley. He's the opposite in that McDuffie was a paragon of consistency in college. And 3+ years, just a shutdown guy in the Pac-12. The coverage grade's great every year. Barely gave up any yards his entire career. So I mean that's who I would go with. I think in the Ed Donatel system, you don't need the freaks. What they need is guys who are athletic enough, for sure. But they're looking for smart football players as well. Sort of like Patrick Surtain last year with the Broncos. So with the reservations in mind about McDuffie's arm length, I'm taking him anyway. If nothing else, he's going to be a stud slot corner for you right away. Well, the Vikings need that too. The Vikings need everything in the secondary. So Derek Stingley, the profile is just too risky. You don't see players in the first round with that profile where he was only good for 1 year in college, and that year was in 2019 as a true freshman, 2+ years ago, on one of the great modern teams in college football history, where it was a pretty advantageous situation for Derek Stingley. Next year, we saw all the coverage breakdowns. This past year, he got injured right away, torn ligament in his foot, a Lisfranc, and that could be, we have seen players where that has really derailed their career. Obviously, he tested well, but, it's something that you can't just put away. So I'll go with McDuffie.
Hey, and we forgot to mention what's really important here. The Draft Network simulator had Malik Willis going to the Lions. So we have that going for us. They are going to be on the right side of history.
I would like to respond to Matt down there. I didn't know who was on the board, my man. Like, how was I to know? And by the way, only a fourth rounder to drop down 4 picks. If that was actually the board, I'm probably just taking McDuffie.
The value's not there. If they offer a 3rd round pick, you're probably taking that offer and you're taking the rest of McDuffie goes off, but not for a 4. That's just not enough value. All right, so we have the Patriots 54 and 200 for 46. That's a no. And then the other offer is go down to 60 and you get 133. I don't think that's enough either.
133 is 19. Yeah. Okay. Probably not. 131. Yeah. And then 54 was 104 points. Ours is 128. Okay. We can decline them.
All right, so here's what we've got, Thor. We've got Quay Walker, Matt Corral, Jaquan Brisker, Christian Harris, your boy Kenny Walker, Howell, Jalen Petrie, Isaiah Spiller, Breece Hall, Sean Ryan, and the best fat lead of them all, Daniel Falele.
Wait, Corral, this is a 2nd round. Corral hasn't been taken?
Yes.
Okay, well, I mean, this is not going to happen in real life, but I would take Matt Corral here. I think, I mean, just for me, you sort of have to at this point with the value. He's the only other guy in the class outside of Malik Willis that where his ceiling, if he hits it, he's going to be a top 10 starter in the NFL. If he was available at 46, I don't care that you gave Cousins the extension. We're taking Matt Corral.
There we go. Matt Corral, Ole Miss, is now a Minnesota Viking, where hopefully Kevin O'Connell can run a couple RPOs for him as he gets acclimated to being the clipboard holder for Kirk Cousins. We're going to get offered a bevy of trades here as we progress through this mock draft. We can give up 156 to go up to 58. My kind of philosophy here, Thor, is I don't accept offers that are wild or ones that just would never happen in real life, because it's try to give realistic situations to the people. So I would say no.
Okay. I was wanting to trade up for Petrie. Oh no, Petrie just went. Damn it. Okay. 76.
So
you're jumping
this
up.
One right here.
You're jumping up
spots.
So it's.
You go up 14 here, and you drop 53 later on.
So our picks are, the first one's worth 60, and then 156 is worth 11, so 71 points. And then we got, Cincy's pick is worth 82. I just think we got to take it. Yeah, we got to take that one.
Take it.
That's a done deal.
Stinks that Petrie was off the board because I know how much you and I value his skill set. But we do have some really good players. Chad Muma. Travis Jones is still on the board, which is a little bit of a surprise. David Bell, John Mechie, Josh Pascal, Carson Strong. If you really want to mess with Kirk Cousins, just give him two guys fighting for his job. Isaiah Likely, Brian Asamoah, Darian Kennard, Darian Beavers, Kingsley Enagbari, and Leo Chenal.
Okay, well, it's crazy that Brees Hall is still here. I'm not sure that we could take a running back, but I mean, he definitely shouldn't be here. Travis Jones shouldn't be here either. I mean, that might have to be the pick. I do like the linebacker. Both Muma and Chenal are very interesting to me here. I don't have any interest in John Mechie here. I don't have interest in David Bell here. McBride, I'm waiting on the tight end if I'm the Vikings.
Here's my question about Chenal for you. Do you believe that he could rush off the edge? I know he had a really nice pass rushing grades. A lot of that came from blitzing. Do you think that they could utilize him as an edge rusher and in sub packages move either Smith or Hunter to the inside?
Maybe just a bit off the edge. I mean, they're switching to a 3-4 this year, so that would certainly make it easier for him. But I mean, for him, I'd want him in off ball. I think that's where you see the manifestation of his sideline to sideline more. So that's where I'd be having him. But yeah, I think you can certainly get a lot of situational value out of him. As a blitzer coming from all directions. I don't know where you're thinking here, Tyler. I'm leaning Travis Jones for sure.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking because, in my opinion, that's best player available. Jones, for me, is going to have a second-round grade. I think outside of the alien that is Jordan Davis, Travis Jones is the best defensive tackle in this class. He has a better pass rush game than most people want to give him credit for, and he's a great two-gapper in the middle. And he's got a high upside athleticism tested, I believe, in the 96th percentile for interior defensive lineman.
Feldman freak lister, out of UConn. Yeah. I mean, he made the Feldman freak list a couple of times. So yeah, I mean, the kid's a really, really good athlete. He's such a good athlete that he was standing out, in UConn games where, got some real chatter. So yeah, he's a good player.
Travis Jones it is. Now, this draft is very interesting because we really took a best player available approach. Trent McDuffie in the first round, Matt Corral in the second, and Travis Jones we moved up for him to get him in the second as well. Obviously, this doesn't hit a lot of necessary needs, Thor, but how do you feel about just getting three really good players in these guys?
I'm feeling good so far. All right. Are we done? Okay. Well, no, I feel great. We're leaving Friday night. We're very excited. We didn't come into this draft thinking we were going to get Matt Corral. Weren't thinking about that, but we'll take that. If nothing else, we might be able to trade him in the season. Oh, I mean, hopefully you can trade Cousins and let him start. But love that pick. Travis Jones shouldn't have been there. And again, I think McDuffie's worth the 12th pick. So I mean, that's a kid. He reminds me a lot of Jair Alexander. Coming out, Jair played with Lamar Jackson at Louisville, and McDuffie and Jair Alexander had a lot of similar questions about him. It's like, I know he was dominant in the ACC, and I know he shut down literally every receiver that he faced, even the high-end NFL ones. But man, is he small? So like, is he going to have to play, in the slot, whatever? Is his game viable? It reminds me a lot of the McDuffie stuff. So. For me, would Jair Alexander have gone 12th his year? He sure would have. So, I'm good with McDuffie there.
Yeah, and I mean, Alexander did not fall very far because the Packers traded up to get him, I believe, at 18 overall. The main difference with Alexander McDuffie for me is just the length. You could argue because McDuffie's length, he's not going to be quite as successful. I really don't care that much about it considering how great he was in the Pac-12, being successful against guys like Drake London. Alexander's length, I think it was 31 3/4, where McDuffie's is 29 3/4. But that's if you give him an extra quarter inch, if you can hire Kenny Pickett's hand stretcher to stretch out that arm just a little bit and maximize that, I think you're going to be sitting just fine. Thor, I greatly appreciate you coming on the show today. Obviously, we have a ton of great stuff coming at NBC Sports Edge throughout the next 17 days. I know you have a ton of great content on the docket. What should the people be looking at for what you have coming?
Yeah, I'm dropping my tight end rankings tomorrow. Day after that, I think it's offensive tackle. Day after that, it's interior offensive line. Like it's almost every single day be dropping a new position rankings, and then leading up to. We only got 17 days left. Actually, 2 weeks from today is the day that we're scheduled to drop the Thor 500, my 500 player big board with 500 comps. So I mean, that's what I'm. The position rankings, stuff like that, leading up to that. Very exciting time.
It is a very exciting time, and make sure you tune in to both Climbing the Pocket and NBC Sports Edge for all of your draft needs for both the Minnesota Vikings and a national standpoint. Dave, my man, welcome to the show.
Hey, I'm here behind the scenes.
Absolutely. Hey, we appreciate you behind the scenes. What does the network have going on this week that we can tell the good people about?
In the Huddle is up in the air for tomorrow. Don't know. We will find out. Vikings Happy Hour on Wednesday. Another great show. Guests coming because Matt Anderson hasn't booked all the way through to the draft. And after that, I don't know if there's going to be an In the Huddle or not. There's supposed to be. It was supposed to be last week, so it got bumped 1 week. Hopefully Eric Thompson and his wife get their calendars squared away and we don't have that issue again. And then, of course, on the weekend, you'll find me and Darren Campbell for Two Old Bloggers once again as we take our deep dive into actually what is reality when it comes to the draft. How many players actually do hit and what you can expect.
That sounds like a fantastic lineup. And I do know, Thor, that the guest that Matt has booked is our coworker, Chrissy Freud from NBC Sports Edge and the Draft Networks. So that's going to be a must-watch show. There is nobody that we know that understands the quarterback position more than Chrissy, and she's going to be a tremendous ad for her. Thor, anything else you want to say to the good people out there before we take off for the evening?
No, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for hanging out with us, Tyler. Good talking to you as always. And tell your wife the $30 it's en route.
Will do. I'll also tell her that you said rock chalk, as I know you're still partying from last Monday's beautiful game. Ed Holm was. I'm sure he was happy for you. In the meantime,
I would like to think
from Dave. Yeah, absolutely. From Dave in the truck. From my guest Thor, I am Tyler. Thank you for joining tonight's show, and we will see you next week. We will have Blue Chip Scouting's Mike Kernishin and Devin Jackson. We're going to talk sleepers, that low-level guys that you need to keep your eye out for on draft day. Until then, thanks for letting us turn your money purple, and Skol.
Skol Vikings! Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell, and rate us on your favorite aggregator. And a special shout-out goes to our partners, The Daily Norseman, where the best Vikings content can be found, and to Lake Monster Brewing, home of the best beer in Minnesota. Skol, everybody.